Flight simulators are known to bring PCs to their knees, so will Flight Sim X do the same for Igor? My name is Jesby, this is my tech department. Los geht's.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Now, it won't have escaped your attention that we are sponsored by PCBWay, but what makes PCBWay so special? Well, let's take a look. For example, the replacement ROM PCB for this Atari 800XL, well, I got it made by PCBWay. But PCBWay do, well, way more than PCBs. For example, when it comes time to remake this panel for a project that's coming up later this year, well, I'll be looking at PCBWay to do the milling. In fact, if you've got a project on the go, chances are PCBWay can help you out. From 3D printing to CNCing to full fabrication. PCBWay, way more than just PCBs. For more information, check out the link in the description below. Welcome back to the tech department, and as you can see, Igor is pretty much as we left him. Well, more or less. You see, in between then and now, I have installed a different operating system. Originally, I installed Windows 7 Professional 32-bit. This is actually Windows 7 Professional 64-bit. Now, I have a good reason for making that change, and I'll explain about that later. For now, though, all you need to know is we're going to test Igor to the limits today using one of Microsoft's most loved and often most hated flight simulators, Microsoft Flight Simulator 10 or FSX. So come with me and we'll get a flight, shall we? So flight sims have been with us since time immemorial, or at least since the birth of the home computing revolution. The first Apple II came with a copy of Flight Sim. Well, it didn't come with it, but it was available for it. And so on and so forth. Every IBM PC at one point or another in the 80s and 90s had a copy of a flight simulator. In fact, any system you can think of in the 80s and 90s very often had a flight simulator, if not the flight simulator, available for it. Heck, my first flight simulator was the Scion flight simulator for the ZX Spectrum, and maybe one day I'll do a little video on that to try and land that plane, because in 40 plus years, I've not managed it once. 1 frame a second, people. 1 frame a second. Now, flight simulators have always been a way of showing off a system's prowess. It's sheer grunt, if you will. And it's also been a way of showing off, at least for Microsoft, new technologies. For example, with the introduction of Microsoft Flight Sim 98, that brought with it DirectX, which was Microsoft's idea to try and get a set of tools available for game developers to come on board to develop for Windows. Flight Sim 98, well, that was the shop window, as it were, shall we say. By the early 90s, flight simming is so popular, there's a new edition of the flight sim near enough every 18 months to 2 years. This is a problem. You see, there's not enough time to code a brand new sim in 2 years. There's also not enough time to fix the bugs that you will introduce into the code for the current flight sim. So for example, if you have bugs in Flight Sim 98, well, the internet is only just starting to be a thing, and if you have access to the internet, it's a 56k dial-up modem, so there's no huge service pack you can shove down the line to fix a bug or two. The only thing you can do? Wait for Flight Sim 2000 to arrive, which you did, and if you were lucky, the bugs that were bothering you would be fixed. More often than not, though, some of the bugs would be fixed, some of them wouldn't be fixed, and the new sim would introduce a whole set of extra bugs that weren't there before. This continued as a pattern up until Flight Sim 2004. At this point, things were getting better, and that sim is pretty much beloved. You see, Microsoft Flight Sim 2004 is so beloved because on this system, which is from 2008, so 4 years after the sim was released, it runs butterball smooth. It doesn't matter what you throw at it, how complex the aircraft, this sim is beautifully smooth. And who doesn't want that? That's exactly what you want and need in a flight simulator. So when they announced Flight Sim X arriving in 2006, we were all very excited because this was going to be more of the same. It was going to be the same engine underpinning the whole system, and they were promising some of those new technological advancements. Yes, Flight Sim X was getting the brand new DirectX 10 that was arriving with Windows Vista. They even gave us screenshots which looked out of this world. I'll put them up here if I can find them. They are fantastic, and it painted a picture that made us incredibly excited. What we got was a little more interesting. Let's talk about technical specs. Whilst Microsoft Flight Sim 2004 runs butterball smooth on Igor here, this machine is vastly overspec'd for the arrival of Flight Sim X. What was expected was a Windows XP Service Pack 2 machine with 256 megabyte of RAM. Or, if you were running the brand new Windows Vista, well, you needed 512 megabyte of RAM. Not too bad. Processor-wise, you needed a processor of a speed around 1 gigahertz. Again, not too bad. And graphics card-wise, you needed a graphics card with 32 megabyte of memory. All in all, that's actually fairly modest. Now, Igor here, of course, is a 4-core Athlon machine with a 3.4 gigahertz CPU, with 4 cores running at 3.4 gigahertz, mind you. We have 8 gigabyte of memory, so we're way ahead, running Windows 7 Professional 64-bit. And graphics card wise, well, we have the 680 with 4 gigabyte of RAM in it. All in all, this thing is vastly overpowered. Let's start up the sim and see how that looks. Oh, there we go. That's nice and quick, isn't it? And we see I've got the fraps counter here running just to let us know what's what. Now, do you want to see the sim as is loaded up? I've made no changes to this. So let's just click it, and this is what you get out of the box, excluding the annoying music, of course. As you can see, we have to load in the terrain data first, and there's a bunch of other bits and pieces that all have to be loaded in, ready for the sim to function. Now, hopefully in the top left-hand corner here, we will see the frame rate, which should be at least 30. After all, this is one Ninja machine, way above the specs that are required of this system. And there we have it. We're locked at 20, and that's okay. We're locked at 20 frames a second because the system says it is locked at 20 frames a second, and it's fairly smooth. There's a lot of jaggies around and bits like that, but let's just take a little look-see. Yes, this is Friday Harbour, and we're in this ultralight? Yeah, I forget. But here we are, and yeah, I mean, that is not terrible. I mean, it's not brilliant. It's not terrible. But of course, it's not really testing the system, is it? So why don't we test the system in a way that I know will push it? So welcome to Seattle. We are sat at the gate there. Here's our 747, and we're pulling 15 frames a second. We'll have a little plan around that, plugged in the joysticks, and we have a look around. It works perfectly. And yeah, now this is where the sim starts to look not so pretty. And as you can see, as we look back over to Seattle, we're down to 11 frames a second. Bear in mind, I haven't actually adjusted anything. This is just out of the box, the experience you got with default everything. Back inside the cockpit, well, it's okay. We get a 15, 16, 17 even. But in general, this is not a pretty place to be, and it's not really helpful to try and fly with this. And again, this is a system that is vastly overspec'd compared to what it should be. So let's do what all flight sim people do, myself included. When you get a new sim and your system is vastly overspec'd, you turn everything up to 11. Let's see what happens then. Okay, so we're back at Seattle, and well, things are not looking good. Our frame rate is currently 8 frames a second, and that's inside the cockpit. Let's have a little pan around. Oh, that is not fun. That is not fun. But I imagine if we look outside, things are going to get worse. Whoa, why are we so close? Because I haven't adjusted the zoom. Now, you can see we're really close to the aircraft. This is because we're in a widescreen mode, and they hadn't thought about that when they built the sim. But more importantly, have a look at the frame rate. That is 5%. That is 5 frames per second. 5 frames. If I head back and look towards Seattle, well, 4 frames a second. And believe it or not, I can actually make this worse still. We can actually change the weather. Let's go here. And maybe it's raining today. Maybe it's a grey and rainy day. Well, it seems our sim has reached the limits available to it. Now bear in mind, as I say, this is a 2008 PC that is far and above beyond the spec required for this simulation. And it's failing miserably. Why? So earlier in this video, I alluded to the fact that flight simulators have always been a way of testing hardware to the limits, and invariably that meant the CPU, certainly in the 80s and 90s. Now, the CPU has to do a lot when it comes to flight simulation. It's really a complex mathematical equation, a set of complex mathematical equations governing everything from the air flowing over a wing, the air flowing over the nose, the atmosphere in general. What are the other aircraft doing traffic-wise? How are they flying? The traffic on the ground, and a host of other things all combine and hit the CPU incredibly hard. Now, a way around it is simply brute force. The faster the processor, the faster the program runs, the more it can run those calculations, so the better the program performs. And that was what the FSX team were working on when they created FSX. The problem was they were counting on speed increases, but not more cores. You see, just after the launch of FSX, the first Core 2 Dual machines and Core 2 Quad machines were arriving. They hadn't planned for multi-core performance, so FSX, at least in its original form released to market, that is stuck solely on the first core. So it can't take advantage of our Athlon's 3 other cores, it's solely hitting Core 0, which is a problem because Core 0 also has Windows running on it as well. Now we can force it off there in different ways, but that will require something different, and we'll talk about that next. Let's go and have a look. In 2007, hoping to fix a lot of the problems and to do something it's not done before, Microsoft did something unusual. It released its first ever official add-on, Microsoft Flight Simulator X Acceleration. It added a new aircraft or two and a few extra missions, but most importantly, it came with Service Pack 2 built in, which meant there were an absolute ton of fixes delivered for the sim in the hopes of actually helping it clear up and work better. So I've installed it and we'll take a look now. So we didn't check our trike, and all our settings are pretty much the same. So I'm just going to go and do this, and let's see what our frame rate is now. Now, I still haven't tweaked anything, but as you can see, we're stuck at 21. That's fairly solid. Heading down. Okay, my joysticks there. Let's have a look around outside. And yeah, I mean, we're pulling us over 20 frames a second. It's not great, but not bad considering we've actually not tweaked anything yet. Because of course we're still running full pelt. everything and anything that can move is in the sim. You can see that boat down there doing something. Well, yeah, we now need to do what everyone who owned FSX did during the day. Tweak it. So let's have a look. Actually, before we do that, let's have a look at Seattle and see if that's improved any. Okay, so we're back in Seattle. And the brakes are off. The brakes are off. The brakes are off. That's a good start. Either way, our frame rate's pretty good though. Let's take a look around the cockpit. Yeah, I mean there's a little improvement. We're 17s and 18s here. That's not too bad. Outside. Oh yeah. Now you can see we've actually got that problem fixed. That's good. Look at that. That's great. Frame rate wise, not fantastic. Oh, it's loading in traffic. Hang on. And there's Seattle in the background. And actually, yes, the frame rate has improved. It's now 7. That's right, we're pulling 7 frames a second in place of, well, 5, 4. So, 2 to 3. Oh, wait, no, it's hit 6. Never mind. But yeah, so, yeah, there's actually an improvement there. But like I said, we've got to now do what every flight simmer will know happens. We have to tweak. And that means hitting the settings. So let's head to there. So we're back in the settings window, and here are a few things. Look, for a start, we now have the preview DirectX 10 controls. In theory, that could increase our frame rate. Sadly, DirectX 10 preview doesn't work. It doesn't work very well at all. In fact, let's demonstrate that now. Oh, yeah, I must restart the sim for it to take effect. So with our DirectX 10 installed, I mean, you can already see there's a slight problem. What the hell? Why is that there? Nevertheless, we're loading in. Bear in mind, this was one of the selling points for the sim. It will have DirectX 10, and that only came as a preview with the acceleration pack. What do we get? Okay, well, we're in sim. 18 on the frames. And that is marginally better. What about the outside, though? 16, 17, 18. But this resolution seems a little off. Hang on a minute. I don't think we're in 1080p here, Toto. No, we've gone to 1280 by 720. How curious. And this reset our anti-strobe score and anti-aliasing. There we go. Now, actually, that is a marked improvement. In default, truth was, for most add-on providers, it didn't work. I mean, you can already see here, look, there's Z buffering with some shadows. You can see something going on up there as well. Quite often you'd find something with black textures because it hadn't been modeled properly, and generally it just didn't quite work. DirectX 10 had so much promise, but it didn't work, which is a real shame. And now we're cooking with gas. So the frame rate currently is bobbing around the 130s, 150s. The sim itself is not terribly worse for the wear look-wise. Yeah. I mean, it's smooth. Now, the thing to remember with frame rates, it's saying 100 and whatever. This monitor is locked really to 75 hertz. So really the maximum frame rate this monitor can handle is 75 hertz, 75 frames a second. But that is much, much, much different compared to what we just did. What about Seattle? Okay, right, we're in the cockpit, and look at that, 50 frames a second. Now we really are talking. In fact, we're going so well. Look, we have screen tearing. You see, I'm not sure how well that's showing up, but there is significant screen tearing. We're exceeding our frame rate. Brilliant. Outside. And you can see the difference in how nice this reacts. Looking back at Seattle, we're getting almost 28 frames at 30. There you go. Look at that. That's usable. That's flyable. Of course, what we don't get is a lot of aircraft. You can see there's not really a lot around. And for a very busy airport like Seattle, that's a shame. But it is what it is. This is the thing. What we discovered way back in 2006 and 2007 is compromise had to happen. Oh yeah, there's a little 737 over there. And you had to scale everything. And the funny thing is, today, the sim would, on my current PC actually, which is an 8-core monster with a modernish graphics card, yeah, this sim still probably wouldn't run that well. But there we go. And there are still places I can make a few extra savings. And welcome to the hell that is the FSX configuration file. If you had the sim back in 2006 and 2007 and any time after that, you got to know this thing very, very well. And there are multiple things we can change in here to actually improve our lot. For example, there's a line here. Wide view aspect false. We want to set that to true because that sets it for widescreen. So So here we go, we've made our changes to the config file. They're not huge changes and I doubt they'll help very much, but here we go, and let's see what's actually going to happen. Will the frame rate be better? Possibly, but if I recall correctly, the most noticeable thing we'll have is a slightly wonky cockpit looking thing because the wide aspect view. These cockpits weren't made for that. There you go. Now we can actually see the whole cockpit with standard 50 frames a second. Yeah, I mean, I've made some changes in the background, but we're still pulling near of 27 to 28 for the city, and generally I think that's pretty good. Now, acceleration did fix a lot of the problems that was plaguing FSX, and the acceleration pack did really well. Honestly, it did really well, but there was more disaster on the horizon. You see, in 2008 we had that minor little upset in the financial markets. The result was in 2009 Microsoft closed the Aces studio, ending many years of flight sim development. At the time, the new Flight Sim 11 was in development, as was the new Train Sim. And for the first time ever in many years, there was no new flight sim due out. Now, this could be interpreted as a terrible thing, but actually it was one of the best things that could happen for Flight Sim X. Because for the next 4 years, the sim would remain untouched. All right, it wouldn't get bug releases updated from the developers, but I'll start that again. Now, the acceleration pack did wonders and did actually improve many things for the sim. It brought a kind of multi-threaded performance, but the problem was, without taking the whole source code apart and recompiling it with multi-core mind, it was very superficial. It worked, but kind of not. A lot of stuff still happened on that first Core 0. However, things were fixed and you began to see what could be a really fantastic sim. And people were excited to know what the next one was going to look like. If this was what we could do with 10, 11 was going to be fantastic. Then disaster struck. In 2008, we had the financial crisis and no one was immune, including Microsoft. As a measure of cost cutting throughout the company, they shuttered several design studios for games, including the Aces team. For the first time in many, many years, there was no new flight sim on the horizon. Now, this could have been a disaster. This could have been the end of Microsoft Flight Sim as we know it. But, and this is a weird thing to say, it was the best thing to happen to the sim in a long time. What do I mean by that? So, the sim had, up until this point, been on a 2-year cycle of create, release, fix if we need to, now we have the internet, and then release a newer version. This is fine and dandy, but it often, even with fixes that came out, meant that the old sim would be neglected once the new one came out, and those who chose to stay with their sim of choice because they'd invested so much money, well, they wouldn't get any more fixes. Well, now we were all in the same boat. But that was really a good thing because now the sim was static. There were no more changes coming from Microsoft, but that meant we could tear it apart and discover what Microsoft had done underneath. And over the next 3 to 4 years, we found ways to push the sim beyond its limits. Now, although Phil Taylor and the team at Aces may have gambled on the wrong processor information, going for a single core performance versus multi-core, they did scale the system so that the engine that underpinned Flight Sim X would expand with new hardware as it came along. And we discovered the loopholes. We started to push the level of detail way beyond what we could, what was standard in the sim, and way beyond what we could set within the sim by altering the config file. We could start to really push the envelope in terms of graphics fidelity. We found that we could have 4K textures in there. We found lots of different hints and tips that were hidden or undocumented fixes within the system that would help. And by 2012, we were putting out some of the best add-ons and experiencing some of the best aircraft, the best weather engines that any sim had ever had. The sim was looking fantastic, which then brought about its downfall. So in 2012, things are going great. We have the most complex aircraft add-ons imaginable. We have the most beautiful scenery available. We have the most daring weather engines that are creating some of the most beautiful and treacherous skies to fly in. Life is good. Well, except for the fact that we're now doing this in a sim that is 6 years old. And the world is turning decidedly 64-bit-ish. Now, whilst I installed Windows 7 Professional 64-bit edition and it's happy, Microsoft Flight Sim is a 32-bit application, and 32-bit applications have an upper level of memory that they can use. It's limited to 4 gig. Now, when 32-bit programs became a thing, 4 gig was seen as pie in the sky. We're never going to get there, but you know, times change, programs become more complex, and well, for Flight Sim, we weren't just knocking on the door of 4 gig, we were flying past it. You see, if we overstuff the sim with a complex aircraft like PMDG's MD-11, and then we add in Heathrow Airport, complicated, weather engines like Rex or Active Sky, throw in a ton of traffic, and say, okay, let's do all of that, the sim rapidly reaches that 4 gig limit. And what started to happen in 2012 and what began the demise really of Flight Sim X was that you now had to decide what you wanted to do, or you got the dreaded OOM. out-of-memory error. So it became a trading game. I can have the complex aircraft. I would like to have the complex airport. The weather I'll dial down a bit, and maybe I turn the traffic off. Because you couldn't be guaranteed to reach your destination. Or worse, your destination would come up and you'd right over the runway. Hell, with complex aircraft like Concorde, for example, from Flight Sim Labs, it wasn't guaranteed you wouldn't trying to get out of your gate. Things became incredibly complicated, and whilst there were ways and means to limit the amount of virtual RAM and to try and shift it out, there was no easy way for the sim to go, oh, I'm getting full, I'll just jettison this and I'll worry about it later. It couldn't be done. The sim was literally at its limits, and in many places beyond it. While the end was nigh for Microsoft Flight Sim X, things were changing within the sim era. X-Plane was doing fantastic work with both X-Plane 9, 10 and 11. As well as that, Microsoft had also coded a version of the Flight Sim engine called ESP. Now it was basically Flight Sim plus the Flight Sim engine that ran the whole world, plus a few extra bits and pieces, and they sold that off to different companies who wanted to, well, simulate anything, including aircraft. And Lockheed Martin, defense contractor Lockheed Martin, took a copy of ESP, they sold it, they had the source code, and began to redevelop it. Prepared launched in 2011, and it was, if you imagine it, a polished version of FSX with a few code fixes and bugs sorted here. The downside was you either had to have a commercial license or, and they were smart at Lockheed Martin to a certain extent, you could qualify as a student. And they didn't particularly check. You see, the ESP license allowed you to do things commercially, but you didn't want to infringe on the games market, even though Microsoft were no longer producing Microsoft Flight Sim X. They knew it was still out there, it was still selling, so there was a restriction. But students can do it, and Lockheed were kind of clever in realizing that there was already a fan base for FSX, and they could just charge €10 a month, or $10 as it was, and you could get the new sim and help them develop it. Honestly, it's genius. And I remember getting my first copy of it. I got it as a press release copy. I did, I wasn't a student, but I covered it for press. And yeah, it was Flight Sim, but slightly nicer. It was polished. There were bugs that were fixed. The source code had been recompiled. This makes a huge difference, by the way, just recompiling the source code without any fixes in new compilers. It actually helped. Prepared 1 got 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. I believe there might have been a 1.4 before Prepared 2 came out. Then Prepared 3. And this kept going. And to date, they are currently on Prepared V6. And the sim is honestly unrecognizable. It's now 64-bit. It runs on DirectX 12, I believe. It's amazing. But under all of the pretties, it's still FSX at its core. I mean, you can't use any of the aircraft from it, but it's still FSX at its core. Of course, Lockheed Martin weren't the only ones dealing with it. Dovetail Games, a UK-based software house who were dealing with Train Sim, they got the rights as well to produce a new version of FSX. They called it, what was it called? Flight Sim World. But prior to that, they also had they also released a Steam edition of FSX where they fixed the bugs, they recompiled the code, and they got a version of the sim now that you can buy on Steam for precious little money. I think it often goes on sale like $3.99, and is usable in the modern era. And that's really cool. So FSX, despite the ups and downs, is still kicking. Of course, Microsoft would wander back in 2020 with Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, which frankly is a beautiful sim. And now with Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. I haven't picked that up yet, and I should make a point of it. But since I'm no longer writing for PC Pilot, I didn't see the need to upgrade my machine just to run that, because I didn't need to. Nonetheless, it's been fun with Microsoft Flight Sim X. I miss it immensely until I try to do something with it. And I mean, including this. I mean, if you're wondering, by the way, just installing Windows and my old copies of Flight Sim X, I needed to use phone activation because the original online activation servers they're gone. And what do I expect for a sim that came out in 2006? Anyway, all that's left to say now is thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see more content like this, let me know, because I have a ton of add-ons we can throw at Igor here and make the sim look really beautiful, and perhaps explore some of those problems that I alluded to with virtual memory. Yeah, let me know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give a like, share, a subscribe. It really helps the channel out. And all I can say is, when it comes to old computers like Igor, well, there's plenty of old software out there just waiting for a chance to be reused. And you should do that. Now, if you excuse me, I've got a flight to London to take. It's going to be fun. I'm sure I won't. Cheers.